Putin, from everything I see, has no respect for this person.
Well, that's because he'd rather have a puppet as president of the United States.
No puppet.
Welcome to Watch Mojo, and today we're counting down our picks for the most unforgettable moments during a presidential debate when a politician was publicly embarrassed, outsmarted, or decisively shut down by their opponent.
When I hear your new ideas, I'm reminded of that ad. Where's the beef? Yeah.
Number 10, Ronald Reagan versus Walter Mondale.
You already are the oldest president in history, and some of your staff say you were tired after your most recent encounter with Mr. Mondale.
Throughout his re-election campaign, Ronald Reagan was comfortably ahead, leading Democratic challenger Walter Mondale by several points in the polls. However, that lead wobbled ever so slightly after the first debate, when Reagan's tired and confused performance raised concerns about his age. At their second debate, journalist Henry Truitt directly asked if the president was too old to continue the job.
Is there any doubt in your mind that you would be able to function in such circumstances?
Not at all, Mr. Truitt, and I want you to know that also I will not make age an issue of this campaign.
In classic Reagan fashion, he flipped the script, turning it into a playful jab at Mondale's relative youth and inexperience. The witty comeback not only made the audience as well as his opponent laugh, it also demolished any momentum Mondale had gained. Even Mondale acknowledged it was the moment he knew Reagan had the election in the bag.
I am not going to exploit, for political purposes, my opponent's youth and inexperience.
Number 9, Dick Cheney versus John Edwards.
Senator, frankly, you have a record in the Senate that's not very distinguished. You've missed 33 out of 36 meetings of the Judiciary Committee, almost 70% of the meetings of the Intelligence Committee.
Vice presidential debates rarely ever grab headlines. Well, unless they come with sick burns like this one. At the 2004 VP debate, Democratic candidate John Edwards kept hammering about Dick Cheney's ties to Halliburton, Cheney's former company which profited from the Iraq War. In response, the vice president brought up Edwards' abysmal attendance record in the Senate, criticizing him for missing numerous meetings and key votes.
You've missed a lot of key votes on tax policy, on energy, on Medicare reform. Your hometown newspaper has taken to calling you Senator Gone.
To further drive home his point, Cheney then claimed that this debate was actually the first time he had met Edwards, despite his role presiding over the Senate as VP. Edwards tried to shift the heat onto Cheney's own voting record in the House, but all anyone remembers is the first strike.
Now, in my capacity as vice president, I am the president of the Senate, the presiding officer. I'm up in the Senate most Tuesdays when they're in session. The first time I ever met you was when you walked on the stage tonight.
Number 8, Joe Biden versus Donald Trump.
Are you willing to tell the American people tonight whether or not you will support either ending the filibuster or packing the court?
Whatever position I take in that'll become the issue. The issue is the American people should speak.
The first 2020 presidential debate between Donald Trump and Joe Biden was so chaotic that one commentator referred to it as, quote, a hot mess inside a dumpster fire inside a train wreck. Most of that chaos came from Trump, who kept interrupting, shouting, and throwing insults, while moderator Chris Wallace struggled to maintain order.
You're in voting now. Vote and let your senators know how strongly you feel. Vote now.
Are you going to pack the
court? Make sure you, in fact, let people know you're a senator.
At one point, Biden was asked a question about the Supreme Court, but he barely got a word in before Trump cut him off yet again. This prompted Biden to deliver the highlight of the night, asking Trump to shut it.
The question Supreme Court Justice, radical left.
Will you shut up, man?
Listen, who is on your list, Joe? Who's on your list?
That spirit of interruptions carried into the VP debate the following week, when Mike Pence tried talking over Kamala Harris, but she was having none of it.
He will not raise taxes on anybody who makes less than $400,000 a year.
He said he's going to repeal the Trump tax cuts.
Mr. Vice President, I'm speaking.
Number 7, Barack Obama versus Mitt Romney.
Our Navy is smaller now than any time since 1917. The Navy said they needed 313 ships to carry out their mission. We're now down to 285. We're headed down to the low 200s if we go through with sequestration. That's unacceptable to me.
Foreign policy took center stage in the 2012 presidential election. While Mitt Romney tried to cast President Barack Obama as cutting down military spending, Obama countered by portraying Romney's views as relics of the past. This clash came to life in the third debate when Romney claimed that the U.S. Navy had fewer ships than a century ago. Obama quickly latched onto this, pointing out that technology had evolved significantly.
You mentioned the Navy, for example, and that we have fewer ships than we did in 1916. Well, Governor, we also have fewer horses and bayonets because the nature of our military has changed. We have these things called aircraft carriers where planes land on them.
He then twisted the knife in by schooling Romney on aircraft carriers and nuclear submarines. By the end of the night, the phrase, quote, horses and bayonets was trending on social media. This move echoed Obama's 2008 tactic, when he shifted the focus from his relative foreign policy inexperience to John McCain's temperament.
John, you're absolutely right that presidents have to be prudent in what they say. But, coming from you who, in the past have threatened extinction for North Korea and sung songs about bombing Iran, I don't know, how credible that is.
Number 6, Ronald Reagan versus Jimmy Carter.
Governor Reagan, as a matter of fact, began his political career campaigning around this nation against Medicare. Now we have an opportunity to move toward national health insurance.
Just 1 week before Election Day, Jimmy Carter faced off against Republican challenger Ronald Reagan in their only debate of the season. For Carter, who was very unpopular at the time, it was a last-ditch effort to sway undecided voters.
These are the kind of elements of a national health insurance important to the American people. Governor Reagan, again, typically is against such a proposal.
While he detailed his policy ideas, Reagan effortlessly stole the spotlight with charm and a few well-timed zingers. The standout moment came when Carter took Reagan to task for opposing Medicare in the past.
There you go again. When I opposed Medicare, there was another piece of legislation meeting the same problem before the Congress.
But instead of getting defensive, Reagan remained calm and completely derailed all of Carter's criticisms with one unforgettable line. That was all anybody remembered from the debate. 1 week later, Reagan won the election in a landslide.
I happened to favor the other piece of legislation and thought that it would be better for the senior citizens and provide better care than the one that was finally passed. I was not opposing the principle of providing care for them. I was opposing one piece of legislation as versus another.
Number 5, Elizabeth Warren versus Mike Bloomberg.
In my company, lots and lots of women have big responsibilities. They get paid exactly the same as men. And in my in City Hall, the top person, my deputy mayor, was a woman.
Following his late entry into the 2020 race for the Democratic Party nomination, Mike Bloomberg stepped onto the debate stage for the first time in round 9. If anyone had a bone to pick with his candidacy, it was Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren. Warren wasted no time tearing into Bloomberg, calling out his history of sexual harassment allegations and his support of apparently racist policing tactics during his time as New York City's mayor.
So, Mr. Mayor, are you willing to release all of those women from those non-disclosure agreements so we can hear their side of the story?
She then added insult to injury by comparing Bloomberg to Donald Trump, branding them both as, quote, arrogant billionaires. Although other candidates also took shots at Bloomberg, Warren's punches landed the hardest. Less than a month later, he quietly bowed out of the race.
We have a very few non-disclosure agreements.
How many is
Let me
that?
finish.
How many is that?
None of them accuse me of doing anything other than maybe they didn't like the joke I told.
Number 4, Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump.
1,800 nuclear warheads, and she's playing chicken. Look, Putin, from everything I see, has no respect for this person.
Presidential debates used to be somewhat civil, even though candidates would throw the occasional subtle jab. However, the emergence of Donald Trump in 2015 changed the game. The eventual Republican nominee ushered in an era of interruptions, name-calling, and exchanges reminiscent of a schoolyard fight. Case in point, this moment from the third debate between him and Hillary Clinton.
Well, that's because he'd rather have a puppet as president of the United States.
No puppet.
And it's pretty clear.
You're the puppet.
It's pretty clear you won't admit that the Russians have engaged in cyber attacks against the United States of America.
After claiming that Russian President Vladimir Putin had no respect for Clinton, the former Secretary of State fired back with a sharp retort, calling Trump Putin's puppet. This remark clearly struck a nerve, leading Trump to spiral into a series of comebacks that didn't quite land the way he hoped.
You continue to get help from him because he has a very clear favorite in this race.
Number 3, Walter Mondale versus Gary Hart.
But I think there is a fundamental difference, for example, between Vice President Mondale and myself. That is, I think we can meet the basic human needs and commitments of the people of this country by restoring entrepreneurship.
During the 1984 Democratic presidential primaries, Senator Gary Hart enjoyed a rise in the polls, thanks in part to his catchy slogan, "New Ideas." This phrase resurfaced during a debate when Hart tried to highlight the contrast between his policies and those of his main rival, former Vice President Walter Mondale.
And I think the dedication of the Democratic Party to minority people in the South and elsewhere shouldn't just be jobs. It should be the opportunity to own and operate businesses that create jobs.
Mondale, however, was not having it. He delivered a quick comeback, borrowing a line from a popular Wendy's ad to poke fun at Hart's so-called new ideas. This remark perfectly captured the criticism Hart had been facing all along, that his policies were flashy but lacked substance. In the end, Mondale was able to raise enough doubt to retake the lead over Hart and clinch the Democratic nomination.
When I hear your new ideas, I'm reminded of that ad. Where's the beef?
Yeah.
Number 2, Christie versus Marco Rubio.
I think he directly mentioned me and my record in there, so I think I get a chance to respond. You see, everybody, I want the people at home to think about this. That's what Washington, D.C. does.
Politicians often slip into stump speeches and well-rehearsed talking points during campaigns. But for Florida Senator Marco Rubio, this habit led to a major misstep. In a 2016 Republican primary debate, Rubio confidently delivered a polished line criticizing Barack Obama for, quote, knowing exactly what he's doing. There was just one issue. He repeated that same line again and again and again.
The drive-by shot at the beginning with incorrect and incomplete information, and then the memorized 25-second speech that is exactly what his advisors gave him.
While grilling Rubio for lacking executive experience and labeling him an out-of-touch Washington insider, Christie called out the rehearsed script. Then, in a moment of pure irony, Rubio responded with the exact same line. Christie didn't even miss a beat. He jumped back in to point out the robotic response, leaving Rubio visibly rattled.
See, Marco, the thing is this. When you're president of the United States, when you're a governor of a state, the memorized 30-second speech where you talk about how great America is at the end of it doesn't solve one problem for one person.
Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. You have the option to be notified for occasional videos or all of them. If you're on your phone, make sure you go into your settings and switch on notifications. Number 1, Lloyd Benson versus Dan Quail.
I have as much experience in the Congress as Jack Kennedy did when he sought the presidency.
These days, the name Lloyd Benson might not ring any bells for most people. But for those who do remember him, it's likely because of the legendary remark he made during the 1988 vice presidential debate. At 41, Benson's opponent Dan Quail was seen as young and inexperienced, a point that kept popping up during the campaign. And of course, in the debate. Quail tried to brush off the criticisms by comparing his congressional experience with that of President John F. Kennedy. Huge mistake. Benson, who actually served with Kennedy in Congress, took issue with this comparison and delivered the now famous verbal smackdown.
Senator, I served with Jack Kennedy. I knew Jack Kennedy. Jack Kennedy was a friend of mine. Senator, you're no Jack Kennedy.
Although Quail ultimately became vice president, that line haunted him for years.
I thought that remark was a cheap shot and unbecoming a senator of the United States.
Do you watch presidential debates? What's been your most unforgettable moment over the years? Let us know in the comments below.
Who's on your right?
Gentlemen, I think we've ended this.
Unprecedented.
Did you enjoy this video? Check out these other clips from WatchMojo. And be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified about our latest videos.